Awesome. Okay.
Okay, great. So should I begin, Kevin? Are you done with whatever you
Yes.
have to say? Say more.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
Thank you so
great.
much.
Should we wait
Just
for more people? Yeah, sorry.
yeah, sorry, let me just prepare here. Do you guys see the presentation screen?
Yes.
Yes,
All
we
right,
do.
perfect. Yeah, I would say just, keep folks, maybe 2 more minutes, something like that.
Sure,
We
sure.
can totally wait.
Sounds good.
Sure. So I'm constantly monitoring the lobby. I'll be accepting anyone that's coming in. So definitely feel free. You can go on with the session without worrying about the lobby, Diego. We'd also request everyone to keep your mics on mute and probably use the chat to ask your questions, or you could just raise your hand and then Diego can address them when necessary.
All right, so while we wait for everybody else to join, I think that's a good reminder, Kevin. Thank you. So let's do a couple things. So any questions that you have about Microsoft in particular, about the recruitment process, or specific questions about being a PM at Microsoft, I'll address those at the end. So bear with me on those questions. Don't add them to the chat yet, just in case they get lost. But as I am finishing the presentation, feel free to add any questions that you have about Microsoft. During the presentation, if you guys have a question, I'll have on my other screen the chat open, so feel free to type it there, raise your hand, and we hopefully this will be interactive and will prompt a lot of questions. But like I said, anything specific to Microsoft PM, I'll address those at the end.
Okay, great. So should we give it a few more minutes, or do you think it's a good time to start? Because we have like 43 people in the meeting right now.
I think it's a good moment to start, but I'll leave it up to you guys.
Okay, maybe let's give it a minute or two, and then we can start. Okay. So Kevin, you're monitoring the lobby, right? Okay. Okay, maybe this is a good time to start. What do you say? Okay. All right. So let's begin. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first product management product-based event, which is the overview event. And we are very excited to have Diego Granados with us, who is the current product manager at Microsoft. He works with the AI and the ML team, and he is a product manager in that field. Prior to that, he had worked in Cisco, and he was in the SaaS team at Cisco. He holds an MBA degree from Duke University and also a master's in CS in computer science from the Georgia Institute of Technology. And Diego, we are very excited to have you here to take us through the overview session. And we would like to know all the challenges and everything that you have had as a product manager. And so the reason we're doing this is as the product base, which is the product management club of UT Dallas, we want to increase engagement between the students of the product base and also the general students of UT Dallas. And we want to know a lot of people are at different phases in their product management life cycle. Maybe some of them are currently working as product managers, some of them are interested in it, some of them just want to find out more. So I hope with everything that you have to share with us, Diego, we all get a better picture of what it is to be a product manager. So besides this, I think we've covered topics like how you would like to take questions and how we'd like to go about doing it. For those of you who join in late, Diego, if you have a question, you could raise your hand or you could type it out in the chat box, and Diego would address that as and when he finds it convenient. And in addition to that, those of you who want to ask questions regarding recruitment at Microsoft and general recruitment related questions can save it for the end, because he'll be addressing that, and so it'll benefit all of you. Besides that, we're just very excited to have you here and to kick off our first event at the product base. So, Diego, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you want to quickly just recap on your next event. If not, I'm happy to start.
Right. So, I mean, we were just talking about the overview of what the product base does, and some of the events that we cover are like the overview which you will be taking up, and then say we talk about the strategy session after this, and after that the research session, and then we'll have like different related events, like how we talk about like the like design thinking and stuff like that, in order just for interested individuals to get familiar with the concepts and to understand it from different speakers' perspectives like yours. So that's the idea. And yeah, Diego, we'd like to hear more from you.
All right, awesome. Just a technical thing. If you guys at some point stop hearing me or something happens to the video, let me know. Sometimes technology happens.
Okay, sure.
All right. So thanks everyone for joining. I hope this session is useful to you guys. My goal is that I'm going to help you understand more about product management and a few things around like what product managers do, and hopefully that gives you much more tools to determine whether product management is something that you really want to pursue, or is it something that you still need more information on, or in the end, if it's something that you think that maybe later down the road. There is no right or wrong answer here. My goal is to share more information with you guys. So what are we going to cover today? A little bit of my story and the accent that somebody asked in the chat. I'll talk about what is product management, a day in the life of a product manager, a little bit of the organizational structure, then some common questions about the difference between project, program, and product management. Also some typical question, PM versus technical PM, and then what's next? In other words, how do you start getting into product management? And as you saw in one of the previous slides, there will be more exciting events that will go deeper into other topics about recruitment and some next steps, but I'll at least give you the basics, and any questions, feel free again to post them in the chat. All right. So a little bit of my story. So I am originally from Mexico. That's where my accent is from. I'm from Mexico City, lived there almost all my life. In Mexico, I decided to study electric engineering. And so I loved playing with circuits. I loved playing with the inside of all the pieces of technology that I could find. And it was really interesting, and I really loved doing that. But for whatever reason, after working at IBM, I realized that I really enjoy working with data. So I decided to join a business intelligence consulting firm. And I did that for about 5 years. And in this role, I was mixing technology, I was mixing customers, I was mixing data. And honestly, it was a great, great experience. But there was one big challenge for me. The challenge is that life as a consultant can be very exciting because you move across different projects and sometimes you travel and you get to meet interesting people. But there's a point where you hand off the project and you don't see the results of that project. You work so hard to get all the data, you work so hard to get all this information, you hand it into the customer, and most of the times that's where the project ends. And I really wanted to execute the projects. I wanted to take the data, the knowledge, and actually do much more with it. So I realized that when I try to get into those conversations with customers, with my manager, with the firm itself, there was something missing for me. As an engineer, I was relatively good at understanding technology, but I was not so good at envisioning the business side. And that's when I decided that I needed more. So I decided to come to the US to study my MBA at Duke University. And for those 2 years, I was part of the tech club. I was really invested into going into technology, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew about product management as I joined Fuqua, and one of the very, very interesting things for me was that I wish I knew about product management before to try to go into PM way before business school. It turned out that PM ended up mixing the best things for me in from consulting, from technology, from data. Like it was a great mix of everything that I really loved about my previous experience. So after doing my recruitment, I ended up doing my summer internship at Cisco. I did a summer internship and full time, and this was working in software as a service, doing some tracking of devices over the network. So pretty cool, non-traditional Cisco stuff. And that's when I realized that I wanted to keep exploring the path of cloud and web applications and mobile apps and all of that. And I started recruiting again, but I still wanted to do product management. And interestingly enough, I interviewed with Microsoft. I joined Microsoft. My team got reorged 3 months after I joined. And we moved from something very different to what I'm doing today into AI and machine learning. And I've been learning AI and machine learning like in the intro was mentioned. Thank you so much for that intro. I'm studying a master's in computer science to help with that. And like I said at the beginning, happy to address any questions about Microsoft, PM, AI, all that stuff near the end so that we focus first on what is product management. And again, at any point in time, feel free to ask any questions. Yep, there's a question.
Hi, Diego. It's me again. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, great. So I just wanted to know how you've integrated AI and ML in your everyday product management role.
So I'm going to ask you a favor. If you don't mind, hold on to that question near the end, type it in the chat or ask it again, and we'll definitely answer that, okay?
Okay, sure.
All right, awesome. So that's a little bit about me. Now let's talk about what is product management. And I'm sure most, if not all of you guys have read some of these things, like PM is the mini CEO of a product, that it's the intersection between business, customer, and technology, or that PM set the vision and the strategy and create roadmaps. When I was in your shoes researching about product management and trying to find out what was product management, I always felt that after reading this, I still didn't know what product management was. It's like this very cool concept that is very high level, that it's just very difficult to grasp. When I was doing my research, I was like, yeah, it's cool to be a CEO, but I'm not a CEO. I don't talk to CEOs, so I don't know exactly what a CEO does, and I don't know what they do within a product. And it was very similar feeling to the other to the other definition. So what I ended up doing is not creating a new definition, not trying to explain these definitions, but rather I try to explain what is product management in function of what do product managers do. Because the answer is going to be, it depends. And it's a horrible answer, but the answer is it's going to depend on so many factors. So with that in mind, let me walk you through what do product managers do? And this is very general. Depending on the role, like the question that was asked about AI, it's going to be very different than if you're working on hardware versus software versus cloud versus something different. And I'll show you some variations of that, but this is take it as a general definition of what product managers do. So first of all, we have to talk to customers, and we have to talk to customers all the time. And this means that when you are doing the ideation step and you're doing the need finding, you're going to talk to customers to figure out what is going to be their problems that we're going to solve, what type of solution they're already using, or what's the alternative to what you are thinking or what you are ideating. Then as you go into more of the prototyping, you'll keep talking to customers to show them the prototype and do surveys and do interviews. And you can work with other teams like your UX research when there is a UX research team. Otherwise, you as a PM will do it. But you're going to talk to customers to figure out, is the solution that I'm proposing actually, does it make sense? And once you have a better grasp of the solution you're proposing, then that goes into the next phase, which is you're going to start developing. And you're going to, if you're in Agile, you're going to involve the customer every sprint, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks to start showing them more and more of your product. And as you're launching the product, you're also going to keep talking to the customers to figure out if this makes sense, keep getting that feedback, get some quotes, make sure that the customer, you are solving the customer problem. Remember that the customer doesn't care about your product, the customer cares about their problems. So if your product solves their problems, you're golden. And the cycle continues. After you launch the product, you talk to the customers, you get the feedback, you find other problems, go to the ideation, you finding prototype, and so on and so forth. So product managers talk to customers all the time. Product managers are also supposed to be, or at least we strive to be, the best storytellers and influence others. Being a storyteller is more than just communicating like what I'm doing here, trying to share my knowledge. Being the storyteller is I have to talk to so many stakeholders all the time that the features, the epics, the emails, the phone calls that I have to be crafted in a way such that if I tell my product to sales, and this ties into the next point, that communicate in different languages. If I talk to sales, they have to understand my product. But if I talk to engineering, they have to understand the technical part of my product. And if I talk to marketing, they have to understand how to sell this type of things. So communicating in different languages and being a storyteller is about making sure that your vision, your strategy, everything that you set for the product is communicated along the way. Before I move on, there's a question in the chat. It says, could you help me understand how is being a product manager different from a business analyst? All right, hold on to that question. I'll answer it in a minute or two. Let me go through this slide and then I'll go back to some of the questions. Now, once we understand that product managers have to talk different quote unquote languages, we also need to talk business, because in the end, what we are creating has an impact on our business. So we need to understand what are the costs associated, what is going to be the pricing strategy. We need to understand what are our competitors doing, what is the type of strategy we're going to follow for pricing, how does that fit in the overall goal of our company. Like, for example, are we going to attach our product to an existing one, or are we going to give it for free? Are we going to sell it at a high price point but offer subscription for other stuff? Like, what is going to be that strategy? So we need to talk business, and we need to make sense of this product. Otherwise, what's going to happen is products like Evernote that used to be free, now they started charging for it, and less people start using Evernote. So as a product manager, just remember you need to get paid at some point. Product managers, we also create roadmaps, backlogs, prioritize, and I'm sure you've heard this like plenty of times. And the roadmap is basically we're telling what is our North Star, where are we trying to get to. And the backlog is essentially how are we going to get there. And backlogs are supposed to change. And roadmaps are supposed to change, because you can't predict the next 5 years, but you can set the vision for that. And if things change, because you talk to customers and you talk to other members of the team of the company, and you realize that there's a better business motive to change the roadmap, then you'll change it. But it's not that product managers, we wake up one day and say, hey, I want to change the roadmap today and completely remove it and start from fresh. It's not like that. We have to make sure that everything is aligned. And prioritizing is also not just about saying which feature goes first. There are so many variables that go into this. For example, let's say I'm developing a product and a customer comes in and says, hey, I have this problem. Your product kind of solves my problem, and I'm willing to purchase, $500 million of your product if you develop this feature. That's something that you need to evaluate. But then also you need to evaluate, if I develop that feature for this customer who's willing to pay a lot of money, how would that affect anything else, right? How does that going to affect any other customer? So prioritizing is making sure that, yes, you committed to a timeline, you are getting to there, and you're also taking into consideration other teams, other customers, and whoever is interacting with your product. And finally, being the influencers. I'm sure you've also heard about this, but what exactly does it mean? Well, it means that using, if you see on the right, I have this data here, using data from everything, from the customers, from surveys, from what other business units or other businesses within your company are doing, what the financial analysis that you did, the roadmap, the backlog, through all of these data that flows across all the PM's responsibility, you are going to influence others, influence your boss for making a decision, influence the engineering team to commit resources, influence the marketing folks to make the commitment to release certain blog posts or articles or whatever is needed, and even influence teams like research or finance. And the point is, you need to use the data and everything you have available, because product managers, we don't just go and approach people and say, hey, please do this. It's like, we have to show why. So before I go into the questions, to me, there's one big flaw when you think of product managers as mini CEOs of a product. The big flaw is you don't have any direct reports, right? You have to influence them, and you do that through creating the roadmaps and the backlog. So think of, yes, as a mini CEO, you take decisions, but you also have to influence and understand the motivations from other people. So before I move on to the next thing, let me just quickly go through the questions. So an example of who are the customers you talk with? Well, honestly, whoever is purchasing your product. So if you were to be, I'm going to make up an example. If you were to be Google Home, your customers are going to be, people who love to adopt technology for home automation. If you are talking about something like Microsoft Azure, then your customers are going to be more on the business to business side. If you're talking about Microsoft Office, then your customers could be either enterprise or customers. So I personally cannot tell you the names of the customer that I interact with, but because I work on the business to business side, my interactions typically are with the technology and business counterpart in this business to business in this B2B scenarios. That being said, depending on your business or the company you join or that you have, is the type of customer you're interacting with. If your product is more technology driven, something like infrastructure, something like cloud, then you'll talk more with IT folks. All right, another one is, can anybody having the skills that you mentioned be a product manager take the role, or should there be a relevant technical experience? That's a great question. You don't have to be an engineer or have technical background, but there's a distinction between PM and technical PM. So hold on to that. I'll answer it in a couple slides. And then, what degrees, fields of study do companies look for when they hire PMs? I'll talk about that as well. So bear with me for a few more slides, and then I'll talk about that point. All right, so moving on, I'll go back to that last question that was just posted. Moving on, the day in the life of a product manager. So this is a snapshot of my calendar for a couple of weeks, and none of that is reserved for working time. All of those are meetings. The one exception is the noon. That's basically my lunch. For me, lunch is sacred, so I tend to block it so that I don't have meetings there. But everything else is a meeting with, whether it's a customer, my team, engineering, one-on-ones with my manager, other PMs, so on and so forth. So schedules are crazy, yes. We talk a lot, yes. And we, on top of that, have to do a ton of work. And of course, it's going to change depending on the type of company, the type of PM, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about product management as part of the development lifecycle. And when you start in the process of discovery, ideation, and design, by the way, the customer is always at the center, like I mentioned before. During this initial phase, you do the research for customers to understand the problems, but you also research your competitors. And to one of the questions in the chat, which is how do we conduct interviews and research? So really conducting this research can be either done by the PM or through the UX research team. And this is about running surveys or running a focus groups or doing one-on-one interviews. It really depends on the type of organization that you join. But again, it starts from the PM has a hypothesis, and through the user research, or meaning talking to customers, you'll realize whether your hypothesis is true or not, or you may find actually alternative hypotheses as you are doing this research. So again, researching customer problems and competitors, interviews and surveys, working with UX research, you'll create a business analysis and proposal. So this is a very high level saying, well, we're building this and it makes financial sense. And here's a projection, nothing too detailed, but at least an idea to basically say, yes, we're basically going to make money on this. And you need to get the management buy-in. Basically, if you are not your own boss, meaning you don't own a company and you work for a company, typically you'll have a boss that you have to convince and say, hey, here's why, after doing all this research, it makes sense for us to invest or to start developing this product or this set of features. There's another question that says, can I share what type of research methods? Well, in our case, at Microsoft, we do things like I mentioned here, like interviews, surveys, focus groups. Some startups won't have a UX research team, so it might be up to the PM to say, we're going to do interviews or we're going to do surveys. And there's a whole branch of computer science, which is HCI, human-computer interaction, that if you're interested in this topic, definitely start researching more about HCI. There's, depending on what type of data you need and what are you looking for, is how you can approach surveys or how you can approach interviews or focus groups or any of these type of research. So definitely check it out. What I tell you today about how we do it doesn't mean it's a standard for all the companies. It's just how we do it. And then in the design and prototype, we move from we have our hypotheses to now let's talk about a little bit of the roadmap. So we realize that there's a problem, there's a need, and we are going to now move that into what is our vision, what's the place that we want to get to, and that's a high level roadmap, right? And like I said, the roadmaps are going to change. So as you're adding more features or changing things or listening to customers, you're going to change things in the roadmap. Very important, especially now more nowadays that we're getting into this world of AI and machine learning, ethics review. It's incredibly important that we give for granted that when you talk about AI, the more data, the better. True, but you also start getting into things like, well, what if you start using things like gender, income, some racial signals from the data? It can get really bad really quick, and there are so many examples out there. So make sure that as you're thinking as a PM, also think the ethics behind of what you're doing. I'll go back to the questions in a moment. Let me just finish these 2 points. Then we also, as we start prototyping, we create these prototypes, and prototype doesn't have to be something complex. It can be just a design, a mock-up. It can be a text prototype. It can be even a step-by-step prototype where you are telling the user their actions and you respond as if you were the interface. There are many ways of doing that. Again, you're interested in prototyping, HCI is a great way to get deeper into that. But you create the prototypes, you get the feedback from the customer, incorporate it in the design, keep prototyping until you are comfortable with this is how it's going to look. Going back to the questions, and let me start marking them as I answer, otherwise I'm going to get lost in here. And by the way, if you want to talk, if you feel like talking, please raise your hand and I'm happy to open the mic for you. Our product manager is expected to be good at financial analysis. So it's hard to define good. I didn't know about financial analysis until I took my MBA, and I took one class. It's been more than enough for me, but I don't work in financial products. I don't deal with anything beyond cost analysis, pricing analysis. So it will depend on the type of PM you are, but if you know the basics, I think you're good to go. Is there a guideline on how to conduct user research, or is it up to the PM? In our case, we do have a team dedicated to that, so they dictate the guidelines, but there's also a lot of ethics behind doing research, because as you can imagine, there are so many variables, so many factors. Again, HCI, great way to get deeper into these type of topics. Sorry, I'm trying to read through the questions. Would it be possible for me to tell about the breakup of my time as a PM? Yes, I'll get to that in a moment. And is HCI? Yes, thank you for that clarification in the chat. All right, let's move on, and then I'll go back to some of these questions. So the next phase is the development. So when we start moving from the prototype to the development, and again, think of the graph that I put before where you got the data and you've got all the different buckets and you have to influence everyone. you at this point, you convinced engineering and design, and if you're talking about AI or other type of products, data science and UX research, and you convinced everyone. So let's start developing. So at this stage, product managers, we talk about the roadmap, we talk about the backlog, we start creating, depending on the method you're developing, like for example, Agile, you create the epics, the features, the stories, you work with engineering to complement the tasks, the stories, make sure everything makes sense, you add the requirements. And you also prioritize. And this is not just a PM me saying, hey, I want to prioritize and here's my last word on it and we're going to do that. It's more about a dialogue. It's more about a conversation to say, here's a priority and here's why. And here are all the reasons, whether it's customer ask or a business decision or a strategy change in the company or the area that is going to maybe shift the priorities around. So it's more of a dialogue than the PM just like dictating that something's going to change. You're going to develop next with or you're always going to incorporate the customer feedback into your development. If you don't listen to your customers as you're developing your product, something might or will probably actually go very wrong. So definitely always talk to customers as you are developing the product. And the biggest chunk of your work is mostly going to be around clarity and execution. There are going to be so many questions, so many gaps, so many roadblocks that you'll encounter in the day-to-day because as you can't foresee the future, so many things can happen. So it's your job to be proactive, and if something gets stuck, you have to be the first one to go into the problem and see how do you solve it? Who do you have to bring into the conversation? What things do you need to change in the roadmap, in the priority? So you're going to be driving a lot of execution and clarity for the team. So going back to one of the questions in the chat about how the time is broken for a product manager, as you can see from all of these different things that we've covered, it really depends. At this stage, you're going to talk in a lot with engineering or design, but in prototyping, you might be talking with UX research much more. And in design and discovery, you might be talking more with finance. So it really depends on that. Your calendar is going to go crazy all the time. It just changes from one discipline to the next one. I'll address the certification question a little bit later. Having a template to build a roadmap, well, it's really going to depend on the company. It's not like the roadmap is more about how you present it, more so than how you like following a framework. I know if you search for a product management framework, there are like thousands, if not millions of results, but product management life is not about frameworks. It's about understanding what's behind the framework. In the case of the roadmap, is understanding that the roadmap is where you want to get to, and backlog is how you're getting there. And so there's not a framework that you use for roadmap, but it's more about a dialogue between the different parties. As you move into the testing phase, here's where you get the alpha, the beta testers. You do the bug fixing. You work with customers to get those quotes, blog posts. You go to a website and says, "Oh, this is what the customer said, that we're the best product in the world." Like those type of things. This is where you're going to start getting some of these different reviews. And you also need to work with sales and partners to do all the training, like for example, documentation, videos, workshops, anything that can help you build a better promotion for your product, both internal and external. When you think of internal, think that the same way and apply it to a scale like Google or Microsoft, Apple, any of these companies. The feature you're developing competes for attention against so many other features, right? So you need to help the sales guys and partners to have an easy way to consume everything you guys are building, right? So through these workshops, the videos, the documentation, this is something that the PM is also driving to see what's the best way for us to make sure that sales and partners consume this in a very easy way. And before going back to the questions, let me just finish with the launching phase, and then I'll answer some more questions. So when you are launching the product, again, you continue your engagement with sales and partners, and this could be a phone call to help them support a customer ticket, or a customer has questions and they are asking you to do some presentation for them. You could do live websites, marketing campaigns, and everything is outbound and trying to reach out to those customers. But there's also going to be capturing telemetry and signals. Like, for instance, you're going to want to know how people are using your product and whether your product has been successful or if the feature is failing. So you want to make sure that you're measuring and capturing all of those different signals. And you want to make sure that also there's a big important point. I should have bolded and put that in red. There's a legal and compliance that you need to pay attention to. I'm not a lawyer. I don't speak lawyer language, but I definitely need to make sure that the lawyers in the company are very okay with my product. And I need to make sure that the way I tell the story, in other words, storyteller, I need to make sure that I tell it in a way that for them it's clear and that everything's okay to launch. And the last point, which I want to mention here, and that's why it goes back into this full circle, is there's customer feedback all the time. You're going to discover new problems or new things that you can solve, which goes back into discovery and ideation, design, prototype, so on and so forth. And this is a never-ending cycle for a product. Let me pause here a moment. Let me go back to the chat to see what questions do we have. All right, so my biggest challenges on the day-to-day as a PM is, I would say, keeping up with everything that is happening, because while you might not be the person who is coding or developing the algorithms, you are supposed to know what is happening with, in your team, in the sense that how is the progress happening, what roadblocks are there. If you have multiple teams, then multiply that times the number of teams you have. Plus, you have to know what's going on with the over goal of the entire product or the entire solution. And people are going to ask you questions all the time. So I guess it doesn't mean it's impossible to do. It's just it's challenging, because you have to constantly make sure that you are very structured in the way you think, you take notes, you do basically all your work. There are a ton of questions. Thank you guys for doing that. May have to skip a couple or two just to make sure that we move on. I'll address the question about PM at Cisco and Microsoft at the end. Happy to do that. Let's see. This is a good one. What have you found of some effective strategies in dividing up labor? Well, you have to make sure that you reserve time for yourself. As you can see in my calendar, I did a bad job, but I have dedicated a few days where I try to cancel or remove or move all the meetings as much as I can, so that I have time for me to put my thoughts together, to take notes, to make sure that the notes are in order, to make sure that everyone on the team, if they need to add something, request something, we have a process. It's not that just ping me and I'll do it. It's more like let's start a chat in Teams. Let's have a thread. Let's have a document. Let's have somewhere, so that if I get lost, I know where to go to and find the question that you're asking. One or two more questions before we jump into the organizational structure. And one favor, Kevin, if you don't mind, or somebody from the team, just liking some of the questions that I'm answering, because I am kind of getting lost in here. Let's see. For someone who is not experienced in managerial position, how do you go about product management? I am not experienced in managerial positions, and I got hired in product management. And I recognize a couple other names here from some other friend PMs who also don't have managerial positions. And basically, remember that product management is not about being a manager. It's about knowing how to influence others and how to make sure that you can show them the data, that you can show them the why we're doing this. Hopefully I'll become a manager one day, but I'm not a PM because I'm a manager. I'm a PM, and hopefully we'll become a manager later. So don't think that you need managerial skills to be a PM. It's more about one of the slides that I showed all the different skills. It's more about that. And if you remember, I never mentioned being a manager. PM Microsoft, I'll address at the end. Let's see. Prioritizing based on feature requests from customers. So I love when people ask what framework do I use, because I don't use a framework. I used a framework when I interviewed, and I keep using frameworks whenever I decide to interview, but I don't use the framework on my day-to-day job. And now, don't get me wrong, doesn't mean the framework doesn't work. It just means I took a lot of different frameworks. I combined them, and I'm using one that works for me, which is a mix of different ones. Because the point about the frameworks is that you have to understand why the framework is important. Like, what is it telling you? Is it telling you a good and efficient way to prioritize things? Like, for example, if the framework says that, I'm going to make it up, but if the framework says that you have to prioritize a customer request over a development request, then you stick to that framework, and that's how you prioritize. But not every framework is not a one-to-one mapping where one framework will apply to every situation. It's more about look at the different frameworks, understand what they mean, what's the importance of those, look at your team, your organization, your company, what's driving the company, and see what parts of that framework fit the problem, and start adopting those to your own personal day-to-day life. So yeah, I get the question a lot about frameworks, and that's always my answer. Hopefully it helps clear a little bit on the framework side. Let me move a little bit on this part of the organizational structure. So what I'm going to show you is a very, very textbook organization. Not every company is this way. I don't think Microsoft this way. I might be wrong. I think Cisco changes a few things, and startups are definitely completely different thing. So this is just to give you a sense of more or less what's the textbook definition of organizational. And again, might be skipping a few things, but you've got the chief product officer in charge of basically all the product dictating the strategy of how we're going to move the products forward. The VP of product, who is going to help with best practices and giving the alignment and basically executing the vision of the CPO. So there's typically, sometimes there's an SVP of product. In this case, I'm just putting the VP, but it's just different tiers of this hierarchy. This is where it starts getting more meaty. Oops, sorry. Let's mute. All right. This is where it starts getting interesting, because we've got directors or group product managers. Name changes depending on the company, but this is where the director is going to be in charge, for example, a line of products, and this could be 2, 3, or one big product, but there's typically one area. I'll give you an example. At Cisco, there's a director for all of wireless. So when you think of all wireless portfolio, there's a director for that. And so different companies are going to name them group PM versus director, but it's the same. Now, under each director, there are going to be different product leads or product managers. And going back to the question that I was asked before, this is where you start actually, thinking of those management skills more than the product skills. And the product leads typically own either a big subset of a product, or if the product is not that big, then they will own a product on its entirety, and they will have, and I'll show it in a moment, they will have different types of PMs under the product lead. And every company is going to be so different. For example, you can have a structure like this where you got a product lead, and then you've got everyone, senior PMs, junior PMs, and associate PMs, all reporting to the product lead or the product manager. And this structure may actually not always be the right one. Sometimes there will just be PMs and senior PMs. Sometimes there'll be junior PMs, senior PMs, and that's it. So don't take this by heart, meaning that if you enter as an associate, the road to associate to senior PM is like 10 years. Not all companies have this breakdown. Actually, I think Microsoft, we only have got 3 of the 4. But then there's a variance to this where you can actually have a senior PM or different senior PMs, and you've got PMs and associate PMs reporting to that senior PMs. Or they could even be a different way to do it, which is you've got senior PMs, associate PMs report to that senior PM, and PMs and senior PMs report to product leads. I know it's a lot of PM word in that sentence, but essentially what I'm trying to say is that the PM hierarchy is very flat. There is not a lot of range between the associate PM and the product lead. And that goes back to the managerial aspect of it. If you see engineering, data science, marketing, these organizations tend to grow and grow and grow and grow, versus PM, it's usually smaller because you're not going to manage people. Your job is to influence others. And just to add one last thing to this is that what you've probably seen is, or you've heard, is that right out of college, you typically join things like an associate PM, junior PM, or a PM position. MBAs like myself, and I recognize at least one other in the call. We jump from MBA to PM or to senior PM, and this will depend on the experience. Do you need to get an MBA to become a PM? No. Does it help? It helps if, like me, you have a story where you've worked for 5, 6, 7 years, you haven't been a PM, you need that business skills, sure. If you start your career as an associate PM, do you need an MBA? It's up to you. So there's no straightforward path to get into PM. There are multiple ways to get there. So the key takeaway from this is, if you think that PM is for you and for whatever reason it doesn't work out, the fact that you are not getting an associate PM or junior PM role right now doesn't mean you cannot get it later on. There are many like me who got it after getting all that experience. And if anything, getting all that experience from outside, from different lines of work, has strengthened our position in the team, because we bring all new skills from, in my case, from data, from business intelligence, from analyzing this information. Before I move on, there's a question. There's an Xbox question. I'll address that at the end. Lots of skill sets for PM sound like soft skills such as time management. How can you show that in a portfolio? That is interesting. I'll also address that a little bit at the end on the resume, LinkedIn, all that stuff. This brings me back to, do you need to be engineer? Again, no. There are PMs and technical PMs, and I'll also cover that a little bit later. There's a hand raised. I don't see who, but there's a hand raised in the chat. Somebody had a question?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Diego. So first of all, I want to say hi. I'm from Mexico too. Actually, I'm also Exatech, so very nice to see you here. I'm very glad to see you. So I kind of share, you were talking about like the road to get into the PM career. And I kind of share kind of your past. You're starting to the talk saying about your past. Mm-hmm. So I'm also an engineer with technical background, and I just joined business school, and one of my interests is, the PM industry. I'm more interested in the business side of the companies right now. So you were talking about a few options like going into an MBA. My question is just, what's your best advice for people like me? We have an engineering background who are trying to pivot or to change their careers. Do you think an MBA is the best option, or maybe focus more on internships or maybe networking? What will be the best, because I've been applying to different jobs and applications, and they always ask for experience, but I'm an engineer, so I don't have PM experience. So
yeah. So hold on to that question a little bit. Let me get to the PM and technical PM.
All right.
Because that, I think, could help drive the conversation about whether we're getting into business, technical, like what are the different paths. So hold on to that question for a couple slides.
All right.
Okay. There was another question? No? All right, let's move on ahead a little bit so that I can cover all the material, and then happy to answer questions, including that last one. So project, program, product, you will hear about it a lot. Project manager are typically focused on one single project, creating a plan, delivering dates, specific tasks, resource management, monitoring control, closing and sign off. If you think about all of these different tasks or all of these different descriptions, there's nothing about creating a roadmap, setting a vision, influencing others, doing a pricing analysis. It's all about the plan is all set. We need somebody to help us execute that. That's the project management role. The program manager is somebody who manages a collection of projects. So somebody who's making sure that different projects are being driven from here's the plan to the execution. They define the control to manage the program. They manage the risks. There's some budget and resource across projects and deliverables, of course. The budgets and resource is about also making sure that if they're reporting to a director or to the product lead, like they help them to make sure who is available from engineering, UX, or whatever other resources, and make sure that the projects get executed. So it's not that the program manager is the boss of the project manager. Some organizations don't have program managers. Some organizations have project managers. Let me address one question right now. At Microsoft, we are called program managers. So if you look for jobs at Microsoft, you'll only see program manager. Why have they not updated us to product management is beyond me. But when you look at Microsoft roles, if you see program manager, it's actually product manager. So when it comes to product management, it's the different skills that I mentioned very early on. But the reality is that you'll probably end up doing project and program management. It's not that, like, I don't have a project manager helping me drive the execution. I drive the execution. And I have multiple projects. So I'm the program manager of my own projects. So if you go to a startup, I am almost 100% sure there's not going to be a project and program manager helping you. You're going to be the product, the program, and the project manager. So when you look at the roles specifically, like if you're applying to any company, you look at project or program are more aligned to the definitions on the left. But if you enter a product management role, trust me, it's very likely you're going to be a project and a program manager too. So now going back to some of the questions. Product manager versus technical product manager. Think of the product manager. This is not saying that if you're a PM, you'll become a chief strategy officer. This is just think of the PM more of a chief strategy officer role. Somebody who's going to define the what are we building and why are we building it. It's typically outbound, focuses on external customers, on the needs. It's involved in defining the solution vision and the strategy. This is super generic. The technical product manager, think of it as more of a CTO. Again, doesn't mean the technical PM will become CTO, that path. It is possible, but this is more saying, think of the technical PM as a CTO. Technical PMs define how we're going to build this. They are more involved with engineering and R&D and planning, and involved in defining the technology strategy. And if you see, there's one thing at the bottom that says, in many companies, there's no distinction between PM and TPM. This is the reality. In the majority of the projects, the companies, the products, there's almost no distinction between those two. These are very, very overlapped, right? So when you start thinking of like the question earlier, like I'm an engineer, I have a very technical background, I'm starting to get more into the business side. I don't know if I should do PM. I don't know if I should stay on what other roles I should do. If you have an engineering background and you want to test the waters on product management, technical PM is a good way to start because you'll be very involved with the engineering side, with the technical part of it, and touch some of the I would say business side of the product management role. Later on, you can decide to stay in the technical side or go to a more, and you'll hear tons of titles like there's outbound PM, growth PM, just business PM, general PM. But the point is that technical PM roles can help you start to get that experience of what a product manager is without leaving too much the engineering side. If you want to completely radically shift, you go for PM roles or just product manager, not technical product manager. Like I said, and like the legend at the bottom, many companies, there's just a ton of overlap. So you'll end up doing a lot of technical stuff too. Now, doing technical doesn't mean you're going to code. It means you're going to understand the solution, make decisions about the solution, work with engineering to see what's the best way to build that. But doesn't mean you're going to actually sit down and code. Sometimes you do it, sometimes not. I'll just give a small parenthesis and then go back to some of the questions. For example, I am creating a dashboard for my team to get some data and visualize some data instead of going to the database and looking at the logs. I do that because I want to help my team, right? I'm not a coder. I have experience with data, so I help my team through those type of projects. So whenever I need to get my hands dirty, I do it. but doesn't mean there's a specific task for me to actually go and code certain part of the project. Hopefully that answered the question. If not, let me know, and I'm happy to keep going around it to definitely answer it. And yes, sorry, before I jump into the chat, just one last thing. Especially, I don't know how many MBAs we've got in the room, but for MBAs, there's no better way to explore product management than the internship. It's an amazing way to test whether PM is for you or not. So I definitely would say it's, especially as an MBA, if you go into product management, it's really easy to go from product management to product management, or from PM to something like marketing or finance or something else. It's harder to go from anything else into product management on your full time, simply because of the number of opportunities, the people who have the experience. Doesn't mean it's impossible, doesn't mean it's not doable. A ton of people have done it, but I do recommend that if you get a chance to test it out on the internship, definitely go for it. All right, some quick questions on the chat. Let's see. Again, thank you guys for all the questions. Have I found to be effective in making sure good ideas move upwards in the chain of command? That really depends on your organization. I do have regular syncs with my manager. I present to him the evidence and the data, and that helps me convey my story. I've heard from friends at other companies that it's a very top-down driven. So whatever the manager says, that's what they execute, and there's no questions about it. So it depends a little bit on the organization. Microsoft question at the end. Design background. Oh, that brings me into the next slide. I'll address that in a moment. What is the central most important task in a typical day at your job? Having answers. And I know that's super generic, incredibly generic, but having answer means if I know the status of the project and my manager is having an important meeting that, you know, he just got pulled into, he's going to ask me for it. And asking me doesn't necessarily mean he's going to ping me or send me an email. Like if I prepare a slide, if I prepare a file in Excel or in a dashboard somewhere that says here's the status of the project, he can consume that information. If my team gets stuck because there's a technical document that is missing, I can help them clarify those questions. So that is, I would say, one of the most important tasks that I do. And of course, the communication, understanding others. So for any Microsoft questions, please, once I get to the end, please just blast your questions because I'm gonna forget about those. Does a technical PM has an upper hand in seeking these opportunities? I am not sure what opportunities you're talking about. So if you can clarify that a little bit, that would be really helpful. How specific topics do you suggest we look for in the courses offered at our business school that will prepare us for a role of a PM? I'll address that at the end. Please do remind me about that. I think that one is important, but I want to address it at the end. The difference between product manager and product owner. Typically, let me just go back quickly here. Typically, the product owners, this will depend a lot depending on the company. Like a senior PM could be called a product owner. And so the definition is very ambiguous. Sometimes they'll say that it's the product owner because they own the P&L. But I can tell you in my experience at Cisco, I was a PM and I was owning profit and loss. So every company is going to name the same way that Microsoft calls us program managers. They could also be calling product owners the product leads or the directors. So it's ambiguous. Look at it from more of your role as a PM as you're growing is getting more ownership in terms of products, in terms of multiple products, profit and loss, maybe being in charge of other PMs, associate PMs. You can stay as an individual contributor and be a senior PM and keep growing as a senior PM, or you can become a manager and then jump into product lead or director and so on and so forth. All right, let's move on. I know we are at the top of the hour, but I'm happy to stay if you guys have the time. So hopefully all of these gave you a better idea of what is product management, what the product managers do, some of the different aspects of product management at different stages. So what happened next? Well, transition into product management, really, you could come from any background and become a product manager. A lot of us become product managers by accident. Some others become product managers because they, fill in the gap in the company and suddenly they became PMs. Others, we study really hard to get through the interviews and get the PM role. So there's no one way to get into product management. What you have to always think about is transferable skills. If you work with other business units, if you work with designers, but also work with finance for whatever reason, those are cross-functional work experiences that you need to translate not only your resume, but in the way you interact with hiring managers, with the groups, with HR, with whoever you're interviewing. Product managers, there's no like specific degree or career for product management. It's more about how can you bring all those skills into your stories to convey that, hey, I've got all the skills that is needed for product management. Remember that when you are applying to a role, not just product management, to any role, and they are interviewing you, they want to make sure that you're set for success. And if they don't see a good fit, not just for product management, but for any role, if they don't see a good fit, it could be because you are not a good fit for the company, you're not a good fit for the role. And it's not about not wanting to give you the opportunity, is they want to make sure that whoever joins the company, yes, of course, it's going to be good for the business, but it's also going to be good for you. They don't want to set you for failure and then be like, well, thank you for joining. 3 months later, you're out. So how do you basically start your process into getting into product management? Like I said, first of all, remove the thought that you need to be an engineer or a specific degree to being a product manager. There will be, and I've mentioned this in other forums, where there are cases where, for example, if you look for Google product management, typically they are asking the candidates to have an engineering background. And you can see that in the job application. But there are many other places that they don't actually require an engineering background. So having or not having it doesn't hurt you in any way to get into product management. So the first thing that you have to think about is getting your resume ready. And a lot of people stop here. A lot of people, so many, countless, just do the resume and then decide to apply and wait. And that's the worst that you can do. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of applicants, and you can play the numbers game. You can apply and just wait. And after 10,000 applications, maybe 100 are going to call you back. And that's one strategy. Not that I recommend, but that's one strategy. So another thing that you can do is start preparing for the interviews, because as you start talking to people by reaching out on LinkedIn or email, or somebody put you in contact, you never know when they are going to, give you a surprise interview. Treat every call as if it were an interview, meaning your goal is to build that rapport with the other person, whether it's an interviewer, a team member, somebody that you get on the phone with. But start preparing for your interviews, because you never know. And I'll tell you a true story. So I was applying for a company that I really, really like. And this was before I was applying to Microsoft. And I had a call with a senior PM. Somebody put me in contact with a senior PM. And I had a call with this guy, super cool guy. And he basically said, hey, nice to meet you. We've got 30 minutes. I'll give you two options. Either this is a coffee chat and I'll give you all the answers that you want about the company, and hopefully that gives you a better idea of whether or not you're a good fit. Or I can interview you right now, and if I think you're a good fit, then I'll make a referral for you. And I did the interview, I got the referral. In the meantime, I was started applying to Microsoft, I got the Microsoft offer, so I couldn't follow through on the other one. But just that incident made me realize that I needed to always be prepared. So definitely prepare for interviews. Do your research on the companies. I had a couple, I'm glad to say it's only a couple and not many, but I've had a couple of calls where somebody sees on my resume that I'm working on, or sorry, on LinkedIn that I'm working on something, whether it was when I was at Cisco or at Microsoft. And they ask me extremely basic questions that can be answered through a website. Now, I don't mind answering those questions. Like, hey, I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to give you answers. But if instead of asking me those very basic questions that you can find online, you really ask me about the things that will help you be better prepared for the interview, that's a better use of your time. Because I'm doing it because I want to help you. I'm giving you 50 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, whatever time. So be prepared for the real important questions to you. And the important questions are about, do you really like the culture of the company? Like, I mean, don't ask this the other person, meaning, is it important to you, the culture of the company? Like, you can read so much good and bad things about any kind of company. So really figure out if that's something that is important to you. Work-life balance, is it important to you? The type of project, the type of ownership. Do product managers or is it the product owner or the product lead who owns the P&L? Like, what are the important things to you? And figure those out through your calls. Not whether the business is doing good or if, you know, what is a basic definition of a feature or a product from the company. And then finally connect on LinkedIn with other PMs and hiring managers. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Let me just answer a question here. So there's a question that says, what specific skills do we need to possess in order to apply to PM roles? So I'll share these slides. Go to the second, third one. That shows all the skills about being customer driven and influencing others and data and speaking many business languages. All of that is what product managers should have as you're applying. Everything else, the technical skills, like if you're applying to a cloud company, make sure that if you have some certifications, show them. But otherwise, it's going to add and show that you know or you have some technical expertise. But if it's not required for the job or it's not related to the job, don't worry too much about it. Focus more on these soft skills rather than the technical skills, unless you have them. If you're an engineer and you have really cool projects and really good knowledge that applies to the company, definitely add those. But, sorry, just one last comment. But if you're an engineer, make sure that you also show that you have this cross-functional experience, collaborating with teams. Like, all of this should be really highlighted, because for engineers, it's the opposite, where the technical skills, we know that you have them. We want to see those soft skills that are more about managing and driving the product forward. There's a question in the call. Somebody raised their hand. Please go ahead.
Hey, hi, Diego. This is Prateek. I would really like to thank you, first of all, for taking the time to guide us. My question is, while applying for internships or looking for jobs, is it necessary to do the certifications first and then apply? Like, what role does the certifications play while finding a job?
So you mean certifications like product management certifications or like web development? So specific
related to the project management, yes.
Okay. So if you don't have a lot of work experience, all of these certifications help. It's not going to make, how can I put it? It's not going to be the decisive factor. Like, if I look at a resume of somebody who may not have a ton of work experience, but I see that they have certifications, that they've done projects on the side, it helps to complement and say, okay, this person may not have a ton of work experience, but these are other cool projects that they've done. These are some certifications. They spent some time studying this type of things. Okay. If you don't have it, is it going to affect you? Not really. So think of it as a great add-on, but don't think of you need it in order to apply. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yes, Diego. So if personally, I have a work ex of 3.5 years. So without completing certifications, it would not hurt me, right?
Correct. Exactly. Like, it's definitely not, like, if you don't have certifications, it's not going to hurt you in any way.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right. I'll get to the portfolio in a moment. So LinkedIn. Let's talk about LinkedIn. There's one rule about LinkedIn, and the rule is don't be weird. And I'll show you what I mean by don't be weird. But the point about LinkedIn is that make sure that you send a message when you connect to others. And I'm not talking just me, but when you try to connect with others, with hiring teams, with recruiters, with other PMs, send a message. And think of it this way. If we were in a party and I'm talking to someone and you suddenly approach and you didn't say anything, you just enter the circle and stay there for, the next couple hours, it's going to be really weird, right? That's how it feels when somebody sends you a connection in LinkedIn and there's nothing in common. And it just makes it awkward, right? So definitely try to send a message, makes it a little bit more candid. Treat it as a relationship, not just oh, I have another, I just added another, thing to my collection of connections. Try to connect with the right people, and I'll show you what I mean by that. When you're looking for a job, find common ground. I'll tell you my example, and for some of or many of the international folks like me here, when I try to connect with others and I have no connections with them, like I'm a third degree or a second degree, try to find common ground. Like for me, like the other Mexicans, I'm so sorry I forgot your name, but he said, hey, I'm from the same school. That's great. That's a good way to build rapport, because I know I am more prone to respond to a message that comes from somebody not only from my country but also from my same school, because I could say, oh, that's awesome. I was in your shoes, or we were in the same school. Let me respond to your message. Company transition is another one. When I was moving from Cisco to any other company, I would look for somebody who did the same transition, and that was a good segue to ask about, hey, how can I'd love to know more about your story. How do you make that transition? Like I'm looking for something similar, and I'm not asking for a job. Very important. I'm asking about their experience. And that brings me to the last point. This is just a very personal preference, but don't ask for a job over a message, at least not your first message. You want to know about the other person. You want to know about how they did it, how they transitioned. You want to get those insights that are going to help you to understand more about the company, more about the role, more about what you need to do to get there. And if you build a good rapport, if you build a good relationship with that person, with that connection, that's going to eventually lead to possibly an internal referral, which is going to increase your likelihood to get hired. But that's also going to increase the chances of maybe that person connects you to somebody who's actually hiring, or his manager or her manager who is hiring. You never know. Treat every connection as a relationship. And of course, be respectful of the time and all that, like very, very common things, but make sure that, don't ask for a job over a message. And just to show you quick examples, I received this messages a while ago, and one is about their experience, and then this person ends with saying, I'm wondering if there may be a place for me to help out. And I'm sure there is a place for you to help out. I don't have we're not hiring in my team. My best answer to this is go to the Microsoft website or the company's website and just, look for a job, and I'll be happy to tell you information about it, but that's as much as I can do. So I couldn't help this person because what this person was asking was for generic advice. Then this other person, remember that I'm a product manager, and this other person asked me, looking for full-time opportunities in software and machine learning engineering. And I'm sure there are, but I just don't know about them. And if you think about it, like some of you could very easily think, well, why don't you just, send that connection to the, director of engineering or the engineering manager? Put yourself in my shoes or in the other person's shoes. Would you do that for any person who just randomly send you a message over LinkedIn? And I'm almost sure the answer is going to be no. Why? Because of that rapport. You need to build that trust. You need to make sure that you build that connection. So definitely be careful in the sense that if you're trying to get a job, we'll get it, but don't start with that. So I'm going to give you an extra tip. And the extra tip is look for the word hiring in the LinkedIn feed. And that's going to prompt something like this. If you look for content and you filter for the company that you want to look for, like in this case, Microsoft, you're going to find things like this, that people use the word hiring a lot. And if you find that somebody's hiring and you reach out to that person, specifically saying, hey, I saw your post, I would love to chat, I would love to tell you more about myself and how I could be a good fit, then that's a good way to start. Skip all the steps of just applying and hopefully getting the call back from the recruiter to directly talking to the person who is hiring for that position. So prepare your resume. That's a great way to start, but it's just the start of the process. This is something that is gonna, every single thing that I said after that is gonna help increase chances of not only getting that call back, but hopefully getting that job. So your homework for everyone who is looking for a PM role is connect with product managers on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. Happy to connect. Please send a message. But try to connect with other PMs in LinkedIn. Send them a message. Look for that common ground. And the goal is to get in a call to learn about them, their company, their job, how they did it, and any advice that they can give you. And see if they can help you connect with other PMs in the company. You may listen, the no is already a given. Like they're already going to say no. Try to make it into a yes. Like there's no harm in trying to make that a yes and hopefully make more connections. And so with that in mind, that's it from me in this presentation. I recently created a YouTube channel. Feel free to check it out. Subscribe, like, share the content. It's about product management. I got 2 videos out, like how to create your PM resume. What is product management? The next one is starting with interviews. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Again, send a message. And so with that in mind, that's it for me. Send me a message, by the way. And I have 2 articles on connecting with the right person on LinkedIn, articles about preparing for product management interviews. And now I'm open for any questions that you guys have.
Before we go into questions, we'll be sharing a feedback form. So make sure you guys fill out the feedback form so we can send you the recorded version of this session. And definitely we could share the resources that were used, that is the presentation and any external links. Okay, the floor is open for question. Guys, you can use the chat or you can raise your hand.
Yes, and sorry, before answering the question that has a hand raised, please bring back all the questions that you had in the chat so that I can look at them again. And now's the time to ask also Microsoft questions. All right, there's a question. Somebody had their hand raised.
Hi, Diego.
Hi.
First off, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to give us your insight. I feel like this entire presentation has been really insightful to all of us, and we've we all have a better understanding of what the PM role is and what we can expect from it. So my question for you is, I'm an undergraduate student, and I know that you look at a lot of maybe PM resumes during your time at Microsoft. So what are some things that you would see in an undergraduate's resume that really stands out to you, that would make you want to be like, okay, maybe I want to interview him?
Right. So definitely when you think of product management, it's about, do you have those skills that are going to make you not only a good product manager, but also set you for success when you start the role, right? So participating in different events, or let's call it side projects, or even your own side projects. There was a question about your own portfolio, right? So demonstrating that you've got skills, not only technical skills, but like if you thought, for example, of creating a project just for the sake of creating a project and putting it in your GitHub or in an online presentation, but you work with a team, you led a team, you took data, you interviewed people, you ran surveys, like anything that you can think of. To take one of the PM skills that we talked about today and say, okay, how can I show that I work cross-functionally? So grab friends from maybe different disciplines, or just people on LinkedIn or GitHub or whatever you want, and say, okay, I'm looking for somebody in marketing, somebody in finance, and let's create a project, a presentation, whatever you want. Take any of the skills and see how you can actually create a small project. Or if you already have it, that's awesome. You just need to put it in your resume and say, okay, I'm covered at least the majority of the skills that are needed for PM. Because when we look at your resume, if you are an engineer, we're going to be looking for the non-engineering skills, right? Because we know your stuff about coding or data or whatever you're specialized in. We want to know about the rest. Do you have good communication? Do you have experience working cross-functionally, experience with customers? Like, we're looking for those things. So it's hard to say this is exactly what you need to do, but rather look at it from the skills. How can I prove in my resume that I can do those skills? Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did, Diego. You did a beautiful job of explaining, all the different things that, one would need to put into the resume. Thank you so much for
All right, awesome.
your answer.
Thank you. Before going into the chat questions, there's another hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yes, Diego. I hope you can hear me and see me well. I have a question, which is that different companies require different things from PMs, as an interviewer, right? As you are probably looking for different things at Microsoft than you did at Cisco. So, what do you think it would be at Cisco, and what do you think those things would be at Microsoft?
So in general, the PM interview is going to look in general for the basic PM skills, right? Like communication, influencing, dealing with ambiguity. Every company is going to be looking for those things. Now, on top of that, there's going to be a component of if, for example, at Cisco, you're interviewing for a networking product like a router or a switch, maybe they require that you're not an expert on the product, but at least you know the market, at least you know the strategy around it and how Cisco is important in that space. So
Yes.
when they ask you a product case question or when they ask you more questions about your experience, they're going to look for things around, do you know the product? Do you understand our business, right? Versus Microsoft, which could be, think of it, let's say Office, right? A subscription business. They want to know that you understand how a subscription business works. So if you're interviewing with Microsoft or Amazon or Cisco or Google, make sure that you think not only of, okay, I need to get my skill set right in the sense that how do I translate communication? How do I translate leadership? But also think of what is Google's business? What is Microsoft's business with whichever branch you're interviewing? Because the product case questions are maybe going to touch on those type of things. And that's where you start seeing the biggest difference, right? It's not the same to manage a hardware product than a software product. We're not expecting you to be an expert, but we're certainly expecting that you know how a subscription business works. So if I start asking you questions around it in a product case question, you know how a subscription business operates at least at a high level, similar to this is a very dumb example, but just to illustrate, if we're interviewing with a cloud company, I'm expecting that you know what's the advantages and disadvantages of cloud versus on-prem. And so if I ask you questions from a product sense, product case question, it's going to be around that. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So just one small follow-up to that question is that how do you translate that into, say, your CV points in terms of would I have a different CV when I apply to different companies? How would I demonstrate that maybe I know hardware better than software? And is it recommended to have different CVs for different companies?
So I'm going to leave you with a teaser, and that's a good segue for me into my own marketing. Go and check out my new video on how to create your PM resume. That is answered there.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, thanks.
All right, let me go into some of the questions in the chat just quickly before we go back to the hands raised. So what is my biggest challenge of being at Microsoft? Hold on to that for a moment. What part do I enjoy the most about machine learning? To me, that the possibilities are endless. And I know that sounds very fluffy and I'm kind of running a marketing show here to sell you machine learning. But the point is that when you think of machine learning and you think of prediction, and I'll tell you my reason why I am loving machine learning. I love video games. Ever since I can remember playing video games, like when I was super kid, I really, really enjoy playing video games. And as I grew up and had less time, I realized that I enjoy games that are like incredibly long, like Final Fantasy, or incredibly short, like Ori or some of the new ones. But the point is that there's a point where there are too many side quests, and I just need to know what happens next. Like, I don't care about the side quests. I need to know what happens next. So I go into online forums or FAQs, or I just need to know what happens, and what happens next. And I need to know that answer at the end, like trying to predict what happens next. Like, I just need to know the answer of what is going to happen next if I continue this path. And to me, machine learning is just like that, but in real life. If we use this past data and this information, and that is going to predict the future in a way, or rather do a probability of the future, that to me is what I find really interesting and powerful. It's a way to predict what's going to happen next. And again, it's a probability, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's a good in a statistical way. So to me, it's a great way to knowing that. So that's what excites me about machine learning, but there are thousands of answers out there of why machine learning. let's go back to the chat. Sorry, the session. There's a raised hand.
Hi, Diego. I would like to thank you for this session. For somebody like me who had no prior idea of product management, it has been a super helpful session. So I had a question regarding the soft skills part. So as we discussed that soft skills are super crucial for a product manager, what would be the best way in which we can demonstrate that we have the right soft skills for that particular position? So like, would you recommend any particular certification or maybe a training?
So yes and no. I mean, it's hard to have a certification for a soft skill. Like I could have a certification, excuse me, in communication, and I could be a terrible speaker and a terrible communicator, right? The certification is not going to help that. But if you say, hey, you know, I don't have a certification in communication, but I was a speaker at, you know, the school conference or this project or that project, like those type of things are going to help you convey that you're good at that. Leading projects is also not a certification. It's about, I led my team to create this side project, to create, you know, whatever, we saw this opportunity and we solved the problem. All of those skills, it's much better to say, here's an example, excuse me, here's an example of how I did it, versus saying, here's a paper that says that I can do it, right? I think there was a question before about certifications too, and the answer is, if you have it, that's awesome. If you don't have it, it's not going to hurt you. But if you ask me which one would you prioritize, I would say I would prioritize demonstrating the skill and measuring it and seeing how you can actually make a great bullet point in your resume versus adding it as a skill. Sorry, as a certification.
Thanks, Diego.
All right, let me stop the recording here and I'll go now to, one second.